Hello and welcome to the 3D Blu-ray Bunker. These aren't film reviews as such that I do here. I almost entirely just talk about the film's 3D and how well I think it works. And this time I'm looking at Steven Spielberg's 1993 classic Jurassic Park. This has an aspect ratio of 1.85 to 1, and I must admit I preferred it when Spielberg shot his epics like Jaws, Raiders and Close Encounters in 2.39 to 1. But in the 80s and 90s he predominantly switched to the less cinematic ratio. I assume to better fit with televisions. Thankfully, I think he's made a move back to the wider ratio in more recent years. Anyway, this is obviously a post-conversion with the emphasis on post, in this case about 20 years after the event. So it's a legacy conversion of a film that clearly wasn't shot to be seen in 3D, but it somehow manages to be a superb 3D experience. There are possibly a surprising number of shots that if this had been made for a 3D release, I'd assume that they were composed to make the most of the format, like the trees framing the background here, or inside this mine with its various depth cues in 2D, the foreground placement of props in a low-down view, the tree where a few of the characters hide away up in, and loads of other views throughout the film. But I guess they're just good examples of where strong 2D composition can often be the same as strong 3D composition. And when we see the bones of that weirdly goose-stepping T-Rex skeleton, there's a great shot where the camera moves across them, and the conversion is done really expertly here, with all of those bones occupying their own space. There are a few times where the shot is full of perspective lines, so they translate to good 3D, and I particularly like this one with Laura Dern at the top of the stairs and her shadows cast into 3D space on those side walls. Or there's a great shot where the camera moves in on the three of them hiding behind the tree, with its branch framed in a way that translates excellently to 3D. I think for some reason helicopters tend to work better in 3D than aeroplanes, maybe something to do with the way they can look like they're hanging in 3D space rather than flying through it, and it looks really good here, and I like the way that they managed to even show that the sea is clearly a long way beneath the rotors. And there's a really nice bit where the helicopter is dropping down to land, and this is one of those moments that I think inarguably looks superior in 3D versus 2D. It's the way the foreground trees are now in such a different space that they give a much stronger sense of scale and position of the helicopter. And I think there are other, even better examples of this, like the tree branches here, look a bit of a mess in 2D, but the 3D makes a massive amount of sense of where every branch is. It's genuinely incredible, and it's the kind of thing that I would always show to somebody who dismisses 3D as a gimmick, to demonstrate to them that there's nothing whatsoever gimmicky about this shot. It's simply a case of 3D letting you see things that are effectively invisible in 2D. There's so much great 3D in this film. The views behind rain-spattered car screens, it's not just technically excellent, but it's atmospherically excellent too. Some of the rain in the torch beam here looks so good in 3D that I do wonder if maybe some of it was digitally added during the conversion, rather than attempting to put what was already there into 3D space. But either way, it's extremely impressive. So basically, and us 3D fans obviously completely get this, but mainstream critics don't, this film isn't a case of, dinosaurs in 3D, that could be good, because it's every single shot in the film that looks great in 3D, and it's worth remembering that there's only something like a total of 5 minutes or so of dinosaurs in the whole film. So close-ups like these eggshells have a strong sense of depth, more than you'd see in reality, or with this fossil in the sand, the 3D gives you a genuine feel of the texture of the thing. It's a small shot that looks so good in 3D, and even better is this mosquito in amber. The sense of 3D here is fantastic, with the little flecks and air bubbles all being in their own space. And I do think that some of the best uses of 3D are shots that you might not think of, but it's a good job that the excellent Stereo D conversion team did, as they made some great creative decisions, like when Richard Attenborough delivers his foreboding line, "Welcome to Jurassic Park," and as he does so, he moves into negative parallax, so from behind the screen to out in front of it, it's excellent creative 3D. And this shot of Sam Neill holding the fence is maybe a bit more obvious, with his arms popping out of the screen a bit, but it's still very good, and it's fun 3D during a fun moment. I love it. And as they move through the park gates and drive deep into the screen, the 3D adds to the feeling of those gates acting as harbingers of doom. There are those things that can trip up conversions, and for the most part this film does a good job with them, like the smoke here sitting quite nicely in 3D space, and leaves, which can cause problems, look great here. I suppose these are relatively easy to convert as they're very clear and distinct leaves, but the film does open with this shot where the leaves are much more complex and they're a total mess in 2D, but they look superb here with loads of depth and separation in between them. It's not all perfect though, like when the camera tracks around these eggs, the moss at their base does warp a bit, and things like that can be slightly distracting. And some less impressive leaves are the ones in front of the car here, where they pull parts of the vehicle into the same 3D space as the leaves. It actually looks a bit weird. Another weird little error that draws attention to itself is when the camera moves around the pillar in this shot. It feels like the 3D positioning of the pillar isn't 100% consistent throughout the shot, so it sort of appears to have a life of its own and be moving ever so slightly across the set. Or there's another bit where something I'd probably never have paid any attention to in 2D is the little tiny spot of lens flare to the right of Jeff Goldblum, and that's been placed quite strongly into the foreground, so you can't help noticing it. Another one where it's not exactly an error, more I think of it as a bit of a creative cheat, are these ripples early on. The shot initially looks great in 3D, which it is, but you realise they've sort of selected random ripples and put them into what's clearly the wrong 3D space in order to create a stronger sense of depth. It's a clever and effective trick, and I like it, and particularly as it helps to foreshadow the film's legendary water ripples later on. And speaking of foreshadowing, there's a lot of that going on in the film with the high voltage signs, and I like the way that in 3D this foreshadowing is now placed into 3D space in the foreground. And those electric fences give us some of the film's great 3D shots. This superb view looking down where the pylon stretches deep both into and out of the screen, which whilst the film's 2D view of it does the same thing, the 3D emphasises even more that this thing's going to come into play later on. And this view of the fence is excellent too. Like pretty much all of the film, this isn't mild 3D, but it's nice and strong and very noticeable. I think it looks best of all when we look up at them climbing the fence, and the 3D is excellent, bringing out a strong sense of height in views looking up. And what I think it's even better at is increasing the sense of height in views looking down. And I might have seen this film 5 or 6 times in 2D before I saw it in 3D, and I'd never felt anything like the sense of height that you get here, looking down from the wall on which they're standing. And the same sort of thing looking back up at them on their way down. These shots are being used as a legitimate and compelling narrative device. I suppose it's mainly because the film wasn't shot with the remotest thought of a 3D conversion. Such things didn't exist back then, but I guess that's the main reason why there are no obvious pop-outs. There are a lot of things placed in front of the screen throughout the film, but never in that gimmicky way, with things being thrown or pushed and pointed towards the camera. Maybe the closest to that are some splinters as the Tyrannosaurus comes for the lawyer on the lavatory in one of the film's almost endless line of iconic moments. Or there's the film's first victim in the opening sequence as he reaches out to grab hold of something. It feels almost reminiscent of the Dial M for Murder moment where a victim stretches a hand out as if to the audience begging for their help, which is something we can't and frankly probably don't want to offer. Faces look nice and solid. That's something that I think Stereo D had figured out how to do extremely well by the time they did this conversion. The 3D really does benefit loads of the film's locations, like the crest of the hill that they're walking up here. It looks very different in 3D, and its foreground placement gives it a much stronger feel of being the vantage point that they're moving towards. This mobile home feels like more of a cramped space in 3D, and I think you also just get a better feel for the shape and size of that kitchen location in 3D. And I love the feeling of depth in the view of the desert, and then Sam Neill's Sergio Leone style appearance, both into the frame and now into 3D space. What a great character introduction shot this is for both of them. When we see Hammond's filmed presentation, it's on a resolutely two-dimensional screen. So this film takes place in a world where dinosaurs can be brought back to life, but they don't have glasses-free 3D screens. And I can't help feeling that living dinosaurs are still a little bit more likely than glasses-free 3D cinema screens. There are several references to stereo vision that crop up in the film. Firstly, in that initial attack at the start of the film, we get a dinosaur's point of view shot, and it's in 3D. And I'm not sure to what degree velociraptors had binocular vision, but I don't suppose it would have been the same as humans, which is what this shot suggests. Obviously, though, I'm not complaining about that at all. A few 3D films, Avatar being one of them, have had what looks like a stereo microscope lying around, and like that film, we don't get a view through the one at the bottom right there, which I'm sure could have been fun, but at least this film has the excuse that it wasn't made as a 3D movie, but the tease is still there, with this microscope being placed strongly into foreground space. And this guy in the little exposition drop film that we saw on that screen a moment ago isn't going into a virus ward, he's apparently wearing a VR helmet, according to the voiceover, and I don't know if this is a legitimate take on an early 90s VR helmet. It's not like it was important that we could see the actor's face, it just looks pretty comical to me now. Still, it's another reference to a 3D viewing device, which is a nice coincidence. And there's this one too. You can see the stereo camera by the steering wheel in the self-driving cars there. Although placing it that low to the vehicle's bonnet does look a bit like they're asking for trouble. Then again, asking for trouble with a badly placed camera probably isn't such a big deal compared to the kind of trouble they're asking for by genetically engineering a Tyrannosaurus Rex. And another stereo device, another one of the film's quite iconic moments, the kid with the expensive night vision goggles, and the 3D's really effective the way he moves to the back of the car and towards the camera here, all the way until the goggles are sticking away out of the screen. Although we then get the standard incorrect view through the binoculars, and if Spielberg won't do this shot properly, there's not much hope. Also, the view is shown flat, and I'm pretty sure that it should be as three-dimensional as regular binoculars. So I've got all this way through without really mentioning the dinosaurs, and that goes back to what I said earlier about how to a non-3D fan, that's all this version would be about, 3D dinosaurs, but to us it's a massive amount more than that, and I think that actually the best 3D view of a dinosaur might be this very first one, with that low down angle as Laura Dern and Sam Neill look up at the thing, and its neck stretches deep into the screen, giving a really strong sense of its size. It's another one to chalk up as iconic, as is this one, which gains a significant extra layer of atmosphere in 3D when the Velociraptor breathes onto the little window there. Or the T-Rex's leg in the foreground with that superb feeling of the effect of its weight on the ground, looking that bit more fabulous in 3D. In close-up headshots, there's a solidity to them. These views are superb, and this is all presumably straightforward conversion. I don't suppose they went back to any of the digital files to re-render any of the CG in 3D. Actually, these shots, I think, along with a large majority of the dinosaurs in the film, are just puppets and animatronics rather than CG, which I think represented only a very small amount of the film's dinosaur footage. In the CG shots, I do absolutely love the way that this pioneering use of it did manage to install character into the creatures, something that CG's subsequently often been accused of failing to do, and these two raptors interact in a way that reminds me of the way Ray Harryhausen used to animate his monsters. It's masterful. When the 3D boom kicked off in Avatar's wake, James Cameron introduced the concept of the legacy conversion with Titanic, and that led to a small handful of other older films getting the same treatment. He did Terminator 2 as well, and there was this film and Wizard of Oz. I can't think of any others that were given the full high-quality conversion treatment, and it's a real shame that there weren't more, as all four of those demonstrated how well it could work. And something else that they all had in common is that, unlike virtually every other post-converted movie, they were shot on film, and it shows. I'm not sure to what degree they removed grain for this conversion, but you can still feel that it's film rather than digital, and to my eyes at least, it looks all the better for it. So just a very quick word about the film itself. This is obviously going to be one that you're entirely familiar with already, and there's not much I can add. With its great cast, definitely including the kids, story, music and effects, it's an absolute classic, and I find it very hard to believe that it's almost 30 years old. For any younger person listening to this, you may have heard how audiences reacted to this film, and you might be a little bit dubious of those stories, like I certainly am when I read about the earliest film audiences running terrified from film of a train approaching the camera in the late 1800s, which is something that Scorsese included in his 3D masterpiece Hugo. I don't really believe that ever happened, maybe in the same way people who weren't around in '93 might be doubtful about the impact that this film had. Well, I was there, and being part of the audience react to some of those sights, like the Tyrannosaurus chasing them in the car, it was probably the most stunning, thrilling and extraordinary cinema experience I've ever had. What a privilege to have grown up in an era when this guy was making films. And the fact that the year Spielberg released Jurassic Park, he also released Schindler's List. It's kind of mind-boggling. The man's an absolute legend. And that leads me to a final thought, which is that some people talk about certain films being more appropriate for 3D treatment than others. It's something that I think is wrong. It's a bit narrow-minded, and it's actually possibly held 3D back from being seen as a legitimate tool. So, for example, I think it's perfectly valid to suggest that Spielberg's other film from 1993 could benefit from 3D, and I know a lot of people would be horrified at that suggestion, but I firmly believe that 3D isn't just a tool for a bit of fun, for kids' films or just for gimmicks, but it's a tool that can add emotion and drama to any film. And whilst Jurassic Park's superb 3D has some of the former, it's also a pretty good example of the latter. So I hope you found this in some way useful, and if so, I hope you'll join me again soon for another 3D Blu-ray review. Until then, thanks for looking in on this one. Cheers for now. Bye-bye.